福利事務委員會
We'll start the second session of the special meeting of the Welfare Services Panel. In the second session, we have 32 deputations and individuals who registered to come. And if you need to use the earpiece and the microphone, please tune in to channel 0 for the floor, 1 for Cantonese, 2 for English, and 3 for Putonghua. I will invite you to speak according to the speaking order here. For those who are late, I will defer you to a later time. And you are each given 3 minutes to speak, and your remarks are not protected by the Electoral Powers and Privileges Ordinance, and the same applies to your written submissions. In other words, you have to be liable for your own written and oral submissions. And for those in the public gallery, may I draw attention to the notes for members of the public attending committee meetings and in the public gallery of the council. You've been given a copy, and you can ask our security staff for a copy. And for the deputations and individuals, you can give us written submissions after the meeting. We'll circulate it to members of the panel. I will allow the administration 5 minutes to respond, and then the floor will then be open to members for questions. All right, Mr. Hawai-Pen. I think Dr. Law has a tough time, and it's unfortunate that his office starts with the disqualification of 4 members who have been defending the rights of the grassroots. The fact that they're disqualified doesn't mean that the voices will disappear. The civic community will rise. They will organize themselves. And then whenever there are problems, we will take the administration to task. And however, the grassroots will suffer. I work in Tin Shui Wai. I've come across many workers who need to apply to join the scheme. The greatest way to deal with this scheme is to tear the application form up. They rather cut corners in their daily expenses rather than apply for the scheme. This morning, we heard that in a low-income family, the daughter chose not to pursue her studies. Now, Dr. Law and your team have no understanding of the suffering and hardship of the grassroots. They do not have bank accounts. They do not have income proof, and they are casual workers. They don't even know the surname of their contractor. How can you expect them to submit documentary proof? Well, they aren't able to save $30,000 even in 6 months. How can they give you any income or asset proof? And then for the elders, well, they get OALA, and then you disqualify them from receiving life because of OALA. So people hover around the poverty line, and lever is a classic example of the government's attitude. So, Dr. Law, you don't just tackle this scheme the first day. You are part of it. So you have to address the whole issue. Lever is a means to help the low-income families, and therefore we want an open and comprehensive review of the scheme, which should be excluded from calculation of income when it comes to this scheme. As said by many deputations this morning, well, even though they earn a little bit more than SMW, they will fall out of the eligibility net because the SMW is set too low. We should not just work on lever. We must revamp the policies on SMW. The public have expectations for Dr. Law. I hope you won't let them down. Mr. Zhang Kafeng, New People's Party. Thank you, Chairman. I don't know whether Dr. Law remember what I said at a meeting of the CCF. We sometimes apply for assistance from government's schemes, and Kai Feng's don't know very well whether they are eligible, whether the schemes can help them, because the application procedures are very complicated. In your application forms, you have documentary requirements, and they are very complicated, and they are not reader-friendly to ordinary members of the public. And on your websites, you don't give people examples. For instance, I work this number of hours per week, will I be eligible? You don't even give them case examples to assist their understanding. I downloaded your forms. Perhaps there are too many people trying to download your forms today, so I was unsuccessful. So if your forms can't even be downloaded, say for example, this morning I attempted 10 times but still failed. So this is really strange. And as for policy objectives, I think the Secretary knows very well that the target recipients are people engaged in low-skill works. If they are low-skilled, they have to work longer hours to make more money for household expenses, for paying rent, for instance. Sometimes they're asked to work overtime by employers because our workforce is too limited. People may have to work for 9 hours. That means after 30 hours, they would have exceeded the threshold, the income threshold, and they will no longer be eligible. We encourage the disabled to join the workforce. The disabled are different from their able-bodied counterparts. How can they work such long hours? Can you relax the criterion in this regard to give them more help? They are just like their able-bodied counterparts, so can you give them more assistance? The New People's Party is of the view that we should help the low-income working families, and you should relax the criteria. Thank you. I am from Kwun Tong. I serve the local community. I come across many kaifongs, and many of them have difficulties. They hope that Lever can help them and give them some financial relief. However, many of them face difficulties in making applications. Some of them have failed because the income limit is too tight and the documentary requirements are too stringent. The expenses of grassroots are high, so even if they are 50 or 60%, at 50% of the MMDHI, they don't make enough to make ends meet, and then SD units are very expensive in rent. Well, even for half rate of student assistance is 75%, and even for those who not on any kind of social security is 75% of MMDHI. So for Lever, this requirement is too stringent. I hope you can relax it to 75% of MMDHI, and perhaps you can have 3/4 rate. Some kaifongs may earn another $100 or $200, but they would lose $1,000 in allowance, and this is very unfair. So they hope that they can have full rate, half rate, and 3/4 of the rate.
We know that the rents of SDUs is very high. If rents consist of 30% or more of their income, I think the threshold should be relaxed. In terms of the documentary requirements, some applicants encountered situations in that the documents required for the first and second applications were different. And the staff would require them to submit extra documents. And they asked about the breakdown of expenditure over the past half a year, which is very difficult for them. And as such, there were delays in the application, and some people even gave up because they simply could not remember. So the requirements might be from the audit commission, but I think a detailed breakdown should not be required. So the requirements should be simplified. I'd like to thank the 4 disqualified legislators for speaking up for the grassroots. I really hope they can return to LegCo. You talked about the complex documentary requirements, for example, the handbook. Can Ms. Ng or Mr. Chang tell us about, give us some details of those requirements? Whenever we file an application, household limit, household asset, and for the child allowance, for those age 15 to 21, full-time student status must be proved. But such proof should not be required. Apart from the documents on the application form, additional documents are required. For example, a student handbook for primary school students, it should not be required. And for the tax returns, it might be required as well. As for expenditure, what's the point? We are just talking about $10 or so. It's really trivial. They would wonder why you have to ask so many questions. Did that come from one of your cases? That's something shared by residents. There were a lot of inconsistencies with regards to the documentary evidence or requirements. Ms. Xiao Xie, good morning. I live in Kuntong. I think the requirements are very strict. And the income threshold is about 90,000 for a 4 or 5 person household. And if the requirements are so strict, myself and my husband would work 250 hours per month, so that's not a problem. But in terms of income, for KMB, KMB would pay a compassionate fee. Well, for workers who pass away, I have 3 children, and the requirements are very strict. The income limits should be raised to help us. And sometimes my children would receive speech therapy, and if the limits are so low, then we have to tighten our purses. So hopefully you can raise the limits. For funds for the students with special needs, I have 2 ADHD children. One of them is 5, and he's receiving a subsidized place from the SWD. And for K3, there are no subsidized places. I'm now on the waiting list for speech therapy outside. If I show a medical certificate, can you allow me to allow my child to receive education outside? We only have 2 sessions of speech therapy every month for my child. This is not enough. And my child is now 5 years old, but the speech proficiency is only same as a 3-year-old. I'm on the waiting list of different service providers, and the waiting time's 4 months or beyond. and I have to spend at least $3,000, and that's not enough for paying for the training. So there should be a new fund to support students with special needs, and people like us are in a very difficult situation. So you should raise your income limits. So otherwise we would have a hard time making ends meet. So if we work too much, then we might suffer. The compassionate payment will not be counted towards some proper income. And the information would show up on the pay slip. So you should raise your income limits. Thank you. Thank you for sharing your story. Some subsidies have been granted, so why are you why do you have to go through a vetting process again? Ms. Li Fengcheng from the Low Income Family Care Alliance. LEFA has been ineffective, so 3 minutes is not enough to talk about all its deficiencies. So I would only highlight some key points. Dr. Law, you seldom visited the districts, and you might not know about the situation of the residents, so I'd like to share their stories with you. The LEFA form is very long. The amounts of documents required is substantial. For domestic helpers and construction workers, they could not secure proof from their bosses, and it's very hard to produce the documents. For people working in big Chinese restaurants, they have a very hard time securing the proof, and their employers are reluctant. So where's the dignity for our workers? So first, you have to streamline the procedures. Even when they have documentary proof, they work 10 hours a day and 26 days a month. For a two-person family, they might make more than $10,000 per month, but then they would no longer be eligible for LEFA. They have long working hours and low income, so it's not fair for them. The threshold should be set at 75% of MMDHI so that more households can be covered. The working hours threshold should be lowered to 72 so that more casual workers can be protected. A few days ago, Mr. Matthew Chung told the residents that he knows the plight of the annual persons. They know the challenges of the annual persons, but we want to say that the LEFA is a poverty alleviation measure, and the annual persons have to do with housing. So these are two separate issues. We appreciate the government's efforts to adjust LEFA based on the needs of the people, but you should not mix up that with the annual persons. Housing and poverty alleviation are two separate things. We invite Dr. Law to visit the neighborhood and take in views from residents. I want to talk about something rather than LEFA. The presence of the functional constituencies mean that the grassroots voices cannot be heard, and now you have disqualified 4 elected legislators, and the grassroots are further jeopardized. We appreciate the efforts of the legislators who took care of the grassroots. Mr. Leung Kwok-hong. I'm now one of the deputations. Whether for LEFA or WITS, when I was a legislator, I have been against them. Subsidies should be paid for by the rich people. in the market, some employers cannot pay reasonable wages, and this is against the UN Convention or UNECR. The government should listen to the NGOs and gauge how much wages should be paid based on the affordability of the household. But this is not the case now. For WITS, for people who live very far, and the government was asking them to find work somewhere very far from their homes. This is to tackle labor shortage rather than the plight of the people. It's the same for LIFA. You use household as a unit, but at the end, the means test requirement is very stringent, and this is a waste of time and public money. This is a waste of time for the CCF. Casual workers are not being protected, and for those who work hard and listen to the government, they would not be protected either. When I was a legislator, I've been criticizing this. When WITS was introduced, I threw a plastic bottle towards Matthew Chung. He used to be permanent secretary, and now he's the chief secretary. LIFA does not serve to help the low-income families. Due to an imbalance in the market, some people are making too little money, and they could not support their families. And there should be a progressive profit tax system in order to support the grassroots. Thank you very much. Ms. Choi Sin-man from the Hong Kong Federation of Women's Centers. We have been advocating the rights of the women. There's a lack of a gender perspective, and they have ignored the role of the carers. And the subsidy has been very low, and under LIFA, we can see that they are requiring the highest earner to apply, and as the main carer, women have to beg their husbands to apply. So if they are not in a harmonious relationship, they could not make applications. And even if there are family members who are relatively poor, or if they're children, they cannot secure the child allowance. As for the high working hours threshold, it's unreasonable. We have been providing child respite services. They are very flexible, and various services are offered. And since September 2016, and 26 women were able to enjoy the the respite services, and the working hours were less than 144 hours. The average salary was $5,700. The women wanted to help their families, but they were mainly casual workers or home helpers. The working hours were unstable, and documentary proof was very difficult. You could not ask the employers to sign for them. And the household income would be calculated as well, and sometimes they would go over the limit, and their working hours could not be calculated jointly. For the carers, when we see the experience from Europe, the focus is on alleviated the burden on the carers. So we should adopt a new mindset. We should take care of our children and elderly and narrow the poverty gap in the long time. That's the case in Europe. But when we look at Hong Kong, the policy is very outdated. So carers should be incorporated into our plans, and the working hours should be considered, the procedures should be streamlined, and we must enhance leaver. The absurdity of leaver is that women applicants have tried to seek help, but the application forms are too complicated, and the applications took a long time. It's not user-friendly at all. You want to encourage self-reliance, but you have not come up with ways to help them. You have no regards towards division of work at home, so we require a gender-sensitive leaver. So this is a new theme. We have to consider the carers and the gender perspective. Ms. So Chi Wing. Thank you. The disqualified elected legislators also contributed to the grassroots, but unfortunately they were disqualified. In the future, I'm afraid that the government would ignore the grassroots even more on the overcharging of utilities, bills, etc. The working hour threshold is 144 and 192 hours respectively, but now joint assessment of working hours is not possible within a household. So you can see that this is against the original intent. So is this actually a work incentive scheme or a poverty alleviation measure? The leaver application procedures are very complicated. You have to produce proof of working hours. But for casual workers, it's very hard for them to obtain such proof. You also require applicants to provide more documents. So the application time is very long, and a lot of applicants simply give up because it's just too fussy. So is this a poverty alleviation measure, or is the government trying to save money for the treasury? And this is one main reason why the number of beneficiaries is going down. So you should lower the threshold to 72 hours, and the procedures should be streamlined in order to benefit more people. Thank you very much. Ms. Tong Chen Yi, please. Thank you very much. I live in Shamshui-Po. I represent a lot of residents, and I have something to say to the chairman and members. I want to fight for subsidy. I also want the government. I hope the government, I want to receive subsidy from the government, and I work in a security company, and the wage is about $8,000. And I have to pay for the living costs, transportation, etc. And I have to pay about $5,500. If we fall sick, we cannot pay for the doctor at all.
I'm getting old. I'm earning less than $8,000. for I think the low-income households should be able to maintain a basic living standard. We hope that the new administration will really help us. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Tong. If you have a text of your submission, you can give a copy of your submission to the members who are present today. Next, Mr. Tang Po San. Mr. Tang Po San. I'm very happy to see Mr. Leung Kwok Hong in this chamber again. And together with many pan-democratic groups, we also fight at the front line for the people. I hope that those people who have been disqualified can be returned to this council to help fight for the livelihood of the people. Many people have talked about the question relating to leaver. I'd like to focus on the question relating to working hours. Leaver only count the working hours of the but you do not count the working hours of the other members of the family. Some members said that the combined working hours of family members have been made. But on the website of this panel, there is a paper prepared by the Legislative Secretariat. In paragraph 12, it says the government response is that for all the working members of the low-income families, if we combine them together, then some members who satisfy the working hour requirement will not be willing to work for long hours. The administration should strike the right balance between maintaining the incentive to work and helping the low-income families. I think this logic is rather interesting. If the total number of working hours meet the threshold, the government will not allow, the government is saying that people no longer want to work. That is, in order to get the leave allowance, they would prefer to give up the work, the jobs. If you ask the people from the low-income families if they have a job, why would you really want to give up the job just for the sake of the allowance? The question is, many of them want to work, but they don't have the opportunity. For example, if the cashier workers, they don't work every day, or if the children are too young, they have to look after them. So requiring them combining the working hours, I think for reasons beyond the control, a person may not satisfy the working hour threshold. We could combine the working hours of all the family members. If somebody works and they can't meet the working hour requirement, if the other family members' working hours were added together, then they should be entitled. So for members whose working hours don't count, their incomes are also counted as part of the family household, household income. So there is inconsistency there. So we suggest that you should combine the working hours of all the family members. Also, the threshold regarding working hours, I may not have enough time to dwell too long on that. But I think we need to go back to the purpose of the leaver scheme, which is to help the working poor households. I hope that the Secretary will really go to the community and meet with the Kai Fongs and the community groups. But in the past, the government will listen to the views, but they would still stick to their original position. I hope there will be a change for the new administration. I understand the Secretary is very willing to meet with different deputations. Next, Ms. Farah Becom.
I'm from Kwai Chung Ethnic Minorities Group Community, and we hear that there are some fellow local, like they also share their, like the difficulty faced by local community, and I hopefully I can also highlight some of the difficulties faced by our ethnic minorities fellows. And firstly, I would like to share about the service promotion and effectiveness of service as from our observation and sometimes even hearing by our community members. The number of applications from ethnic minorities applicants are not that high as, but I think there are many who are eligible to apply, but due to the lack of promotion and facilitation, they cannot reach the service, and sometimes they don't even know how to apply for LIFA. And I would suggest that I know that LIFA have set at some sports center, and if there are some ethnic minority staff to sport, or I think we can also follow, like as a Labor Department, they have some ambassador scheme in order to for ethnic minorities and to make their service more effective. And if the LIFA also follow the Labor Department, I think the service will be more effective and it will be easily can reach to our fellow EM community and will be effective and convenient for them. And secondly, I will also share like about the application arrangement. Like the claim period is like for 6 months, but if it is like for 1 year, then at least the eligible family, they have enough time to prepare for the documents, because sometimes in our experience there are due to the household size in our ethnic minority community, maybe their family size compared to the local, they are maybe like 6 or more people. So in order to meet the target of expenditures, they are working like maybe for 2 jobs. So sometimes in order to when they are preparing all the documents for both of the works, maybe they are already delayed to submit the documents, and eventually they will also miss the claim period. And lastly, I will share that for the LIFA, maybe if they can organize more filling or briefing sessions for ethnic minority community also, or maybe they can sponsor some NGOs to do it, or maybe if they recruit some ethnic minority staff and they can send them to NGOs which have many ethnic minorities living in such districts. And then if they send their representative to their center to do it, I think the service will be effective and will be our fellow ethnic minority community can also be they can also get benefit from it. And that's all for my part. Thank you.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you. We will now come to the last deputation, Mr. Ma.
Kwai Chung Ethnic Minorities Concerned Group. So I am here today to talk more about the size of the family and the limit of their incomes and the expenditure. So firstly, I will talk about most of the families in Kwai Chung area, they are deprived, even though you can find it according to the census, because most of the ethnic minorities have the bigger size, as she mentioned it, one of the ethnic minorities he already mentioned. And because that's why there is always be most of the families, there is one person who is the breadwinner. Maybe he have 6 or 8 children, and maybe the family size will be 8 to 9. So my question is that about your diagram implementation of 2000 April 17 to March 2018, you have mentioned in your income limit size that if the 2% in a family full allowance period is 9,500, their income is around 9,500 for the 2 families. And family with the 6 or above in a LIFA assess, maybe their income range is similar, like 6 to 10 or above. Their income may be same, but my question is that if the family size is 8 or more with 6 children, maybe age 8 to 16, there is only a head who is only the one who is, getting salaries, and the rest of them rely on him. And his application is rejected because his salary exceeds the limit, just around 2,000 or 3,000. So in my point of view, and I think most of my local friends here, they also mentioned the same thing. Is it fair? Is it fair like the family who have a large number of the size, and you are assessing just because of their income, but why don't you assess according to their expenditure? Because some of them are living in a private sector, so as you all know, their rent are very high nowadays. It's like reaching on top. So firstly, they are paying a high rent. Maybe their expenditure is also too high. So I think you should follow to amend, and this is just like you have to make it more carefully decision whether we are assessing the application according to the limit or to their expenditure. So, and secondly, I will talk about that because the most of the ethnic minorities in Kwai Chung, as she also mentioned, is lack of promotion, that our people cannot reach to the limited services. So I think you should make some kind of the platform for them to provide some kind of the realistic or tailor-made information which can help them. So that's all. Thank you very much.
好，唔該晒。
Thank you very much. For large households, would you be able to offer them some tailor-made, allowances? Thank you very much. We will now invite the Secretary to make a response. Following that, members can ask questions. We have Mr. Jeremy Tam, Deputy Chairman, and Mr. Pan Siu Ping. We'll ask the Secretary to respond first of all. Chairman, as the deputations raised during the previous session, including the proposal of combining the working hours, ceiling on working hours, and one deputation raised the question regarding large households. The income limit, we have 1, 2, 3, up to 5 member households. Should we consider, household size of 7, 8, or even 9 members? I understand it's 13 for CSSA application. So this is something that we will also go back and think about and see whether we can really help these people who have the need. But as I said during the last session, the Census and Statistics Department is still helping us analyze some of the information and data. So we need to take a global look at all the details before we can really, give you specific response to each of the suggestions. With that, I'll ask Mr. Lee to respond to some of the questions relating to the application procedure. Well, as I said during the first session, originally, when we, designed the lever system, we had the, approval, criteria, working hours, income, and asset. So in designing the application form, we adopted the same method to collect the relevant information. Indeed, when processing certain applications, we may require the applicant to provide further information. And this would depend on the individual cases of each of these applications. For some specific cases, if the deputations can refer some of these cases to us, we will be willing to review whether we could improve the way we handle some of these cases. Some deputations refer to the question of problem facing casual workers. In the application form, we have the Form 007A, which is specifically for those applicants who are casual workers. When they fill in this application form, they only need to fill in the name of the employer and the contact number. So the applicant does not need to give details in respect of all the 8 employers they work for. Some deputations also ask whether during the second application the applicant would need to submit the same information. If they have been successful in the first application, if the personal data and information have remained unchanged, they will not need to submit the same information again. For example, proof of address, unless the applicant says that they've changed their address. Then, of course, they would need to provide the additional information. Some deputations also ask about inquiries regarding household information. Normally, only if we find out that there have been deposits and withdrawals from certain bank accounts of the household, only in this case we would inquire about those transactions.
This is for the ethnic minorities. As mentioned in the first section, we are committed to providing as much assistance to the ethnic minorities applicants. And I think since the scheme was introduced was first launched in the publicity in November 2015, we have been organizing briefing sessions for the ethnic minorities in particular, with the provision of simultaneous interpretation on site. And if there is any ethnic minority applicant who needs assistance from us, we encourage them to call our hotline, because we will be able to consider how best we can provide services for these hotlines. And we are also stand ready to continue to go to the districts. For example, if Kwai Chung is an area where the ethnic minority applicants congregate, we are more than happy to go there and to provide briefing sessions after office hours on weekends, which we have been doing for the last year or so. Thank you.
Mr. Sharma?
Yes, it's written on the website as well as on the application form. But the question is that most of the ethnic minorities, their education backgrounds are not very good, okay? So obviously, if the education background is not good, so how can they reach to the service? And what I mean, so I think you can see the data and your statistic and the poverty rate of the ethnic minorities, and the number of the application form has been launched in the past few years is very few. Even though the local people, they are having the same problem. So I think this is the main point I wanted to discuss. You have said the service support center, but the main problem is that they have to do a very difficult procedure and the requirement. So some of the requirements which they never met, because due to the lack of the information, they cannot want to make each step by step and step. So that's why they will ignore it. So I think you can make some kind of the easy line for them to go on through the process. So this is what my, thank you.
Okay. 局長，處長會唔會
Director?
To encourage the potential applicants to come forward and to call our hotline, and we definitely will be able to consider what best assistance can be provided to each individual. The trouble is, if these people do not come forward by simply calling our hotline, I think it would be very difficult for us to reach out to them. So I do encourage once again that, you know, whoever wants assistance, they are more than welcome to call our hotline. Thank you.
好，唔該。跟住落嚟咧就係
It's now time for members to ask questions. We have fewer deputations for the second session, so we have enough time. And if you're so interested, I can give you another round of 3 minutes for questions. So we say 4 minutes for each member. Mr. Jeffrey Tam. Regarding LEVA, I would like to listen more to Mr. Leung Kwok Hong's comments. Thank you, Mr. Tam. Talking about the effectiveness of LEVA, I think it would be best for us to look at the numbers. That is, and the number of people it will benefit. According to my recollection, the number was about 200,000, but less than 60,000. There are less than 60,000 applications. So no matter how you explain yourself, the scheme is not very effective. I was disqualified just because I said something wrong during when I took my oath, and I was not given a second chance. But the bureaus and the permanent secretaries and the secretaries or the directors are not accountable at all. So my question is, on the subject of LEVA, have you made a public apology? You now have passed the apology ordinance. So, Secretary, will you represent your predecessor and your bureau to make a public apology to the people?
200,000 people were expected to benefit, but you have less than 60,000 now. And it's less than 15%. So the policy from consultation of legislators, we told you that it won't work in this way. And for the household income, if you do not count individuals, that is not going to work. And what you propose here is not in line with the reality. And legislators were only allowed to sworn in once. How come public officers can allow to make mistakes 10 times, Secretary? All right, we'll invite the administration to respond in one go. I'm sorry, I'd like to hear a reply from the Secretary. Chairman, I believe the last government said very clearly that when the scheme was launched, we were not in possession of information such as the number of working hours in relation to assets held. So the data was based on very simple assumptions. So it's not that the policy it's not about how many people can we help, but it was just a projection. I believe our colleagues in the last government might not feel the need to apologize because of the deviation in the projection. But when you come to LegCo for money, you do not just give us guesstimates. You must give us some basis for your projection before members decided whether to approve it or not. So my question for Mr. Leung Kok Hong is, did you support the item because you trusted their projection? We're told that it would be 200,000. They must change their application criteria. The same goes with widths. So how can this council monitor the executive if you always get to win? And when we come in a few more times, you call us filibustering. And if you don't like it, you disqualify us. Deputy Chairman. Chairman, the last government did not rely on IQ or EQ to administer Hong Kong. Rather, they rely on disqualifying, DQing our members. Now, if not for the disqualification of 4 members, we would have a much heated debate here. For instance, Lau Siu Lai would ask you about the situation in Sam Shui Po. Nathan Law would challenge you for suppressing the grassroots. Given that you have enough resources, why don't you help the grassroots more? And Edward Yu would give you statistics. At first, you expected to benefit 0.7 million people, but now you can only benefit less than 120,000. And for Mr. Leung Kok Hong, he said that you were not really targeting the needy families. Right, these legislators are not here, but we can ask questions on their behalf. So it is our duty to question the administration. So the problem of lever is obvious for everyone to see. You fail to address the aspirations of those in need. How come many have not come to apply for the scheme? Because of the requirement on working hours. This has also started family disputes. And what about child allowance? At first, you wanted everyone to go and apply for assistance under the scheme, yet you have excluded singleton applicants. And then the CCF also scrapped the assistance for people who are not on CSSA and other social security allowances. So we have to ask questions on behalf of the public. A deputation here said just now that the views or the voice might not be that strong here. I feel differently. Just like what Mr. Lau Kok-hong said frequently, even though he may be in a different position, I think he can continue to question the administration. And I'd like to ask these questions on his behalf. Yes, you may think that this has got nothing to do with you as your predecessor, but I'd like to ask you, is there something wrong with the projection, and how can you rectify the current situation? Dr. Law. I have nothing more to add because Mr. Kwok only repeated previous questions. All right, you told us that 0.7 million was not really an indicator, it's just for reference. Can you tell us what's it all about? When the administration came to us for money, we were told that it was an indicator, and now you tell us that it's just for reference. So how should we understand figures supplied by the administration? I think Mr. Jeremy Tam asked a similar question. Of course, the government has the duty to make some projections when it comes to apply for funding. For instance, our estimate on the number of families and people that can benefit, and we have to work out a budget, and that becomes funding we seek from the administration. But there is information we don't possess even as at now. For instance, the relationship between working hours, number of working hours, and assets held, and people who fulfill all the requirements, so on and so forth. So the budget was made based on some rough assumptions or estimates. Now, for this kind of schemes, the purpose is to ensure that we have enough resources to implement the scheme, and that we don't have to come back for supplementary provision from LegCo. I believe the inaccuracy was due to insufficient information held, and I can't see why the previous administration should apologize for this. So I remind members that in future, when we vet or examine funding applications, we look at the basis for the projections. Mr. Poon Siu Ping. Thank you, Chairman. I thank deputations and individuals for giving us their views. Well, now, for LEVA, we want the application procedures to be relaxed and simplified, and the threshold on working hours should also, number of working hours should also be reduced. Anyway, by end of July, there will be proposals to improve this scheme. Yes, what happened is different from the original policy objectives. So there was staff members employed to deal with this scheme, and I think there was some projections. You want to launch the improvement measures in the end of this month. We want you to expedite the process because we want you to help the needy families. The policy address will be delivered in October. Can the new proposals be given to us prior to that date? I don't want assistance to the low-income families be delayed. We were told that you have commissioned an NGOs to help, and I think that is rather effective. I'd like to know whether there will be more NGOs asked to offer assistance. Originally, you have 500 staff members to run the scheme. I'd like to know more about the manpower arrangement for the future. I've just got the timetable for the next legislative session. Can we expect something in the policy address to be delivered on the 10th of October? Our plan is to complete the review by the end of this month. If everything goes smoothly, we don't run the possibility of announcing our proposals earlier. So will you continue to employ NGOs to help you to promote the scheme, and will you offer financial support to NGOs to do this task? Mr. Lee? Well, in January and May, NGOs were asked to help to promote the scheme. We expected the outcome to be effective, because our previous communication with NGOs gave us the impression that many people were illiterate. So long as services were available from NGOs, people would come forward to apply. But as mentioned by many deputations, in between the 5 months, there were only 380 odd cases. And NGOs had to make great efforts to identify these applicants. Therefore, at this stage, we have no intention to extend the trial scheme. We'll continue to send our colleagues to the HOS Center at Lok Fu. Indeed, people will make inquiries at Lok Fu and will also ask us to assist in the filling of forms, and we'll continue to do this. And if NGOs are interested in organizing community forums, then at any time, even after office hour or at weekends, our colleagues will be willing and will be happy to offer services there. Some members said that perhaps after the review, more people we need to run the scheme that would be covered in our coming review. Mr. Poon, the answer is they're not going to ask NGOs to help anymore. They will just do it at the Lok Fu HOS Center, and that if NGOs are willing to do it, they can offer support in the form of attending their briefings. Mr. Kok Wai Keung. Thank you, Chairman. I want to thank you. This public hearing is convened at my request because there are already many meetings of this panel. I really appreciate your running another public hearing this morning, and I want to thank deputations for this session. Although they have some opinions, or some views on things that have happened in the community recently, they do agree that there are things we have to tackle, and we cannot mark time when it comes to livelihood issues. And I think you have made very good representations. Of course, we don't want our things to be like the Finance Committee, which has already aborted twice. So, if I may, once again, repeat this. We want the cap for working hours be relaxed. So you're talking about 48 hours a week. It should be adjusted to 44, so it should be 176 hours per month. And to be eligible for basic allowance, it should be in between 144 to 167 hours, and there should be a lower tier of allowance for people working 72 to 144 hours. So the high allowance should become $1,500, and basic it should be $100,000, and the lower allowance $600. Only by so doing can we better protect our low-income households. There are more and more casual jobs around, and grassroots have no choice but to take up a few casual jobs at the same time to make a living. And then it will be even more difficult for them to get income proof. getting income proof for one job is difficult enough, not to mention a few more. So the Bureau really has to relax the requirements so that the needy people can get help they deserve. And as far as the threshold is concerned, the number of hours worked is one thing, and the income is another. The income is far too low. The threshold is far too high. If it can be set at 60 to 70% of the MMDHI, I'm sure this will be more in line with the reality. We have a submission for the administration, and we won't label on the points again. We wanted the report to be available by the end of this month, of this year. I'd like to know whether it will be as late as the 31st of December. Can it be a little bit earlier to give early relief to the needy families? Secretary. Yes, these suggestions will be taken into consideration, and if the review can be completed earlier, I don't know the possibility of sharing with you our preliminary views earlier. Will the review be done by the Bureau or by an independent party? It is to be done by this Bureau. Well, we still have some time left. I'd like to know whether anyone from the deputations would like to supplement. Well, each speaker will have only 2 minutes. Mr. Chang Ka-fung. Thank you, Chairman. Only one family member is allowed to declare his working hours. It's just like dependent parents' allowance. There may be siblings in a family, and they may all fight for the dependent parents' allowance, giving rise to disputes within the family. So will you allow a second member in the family to apply for leaver, and there isn't sufficient understanding? And I heard from Mr. Lee that you can assist NGOs. I hope to liaise with NGOs with Mr. Lee more often later. Thank you. The administration earmarked $3 billion for the scheme, and there are only 100 or 10,000 people successful to join the scheme, and only $500 million have been spent. So the administrative cost is so much. Isn't it a waste? You spend so much money on administration matters to benefit so few beneficiaries. This is because the application threshold is too high. So it's important that you relax the threshold. The director said that there are some applications from the districts. So will you give money to district organizations? Because many Gaifongs cannot travel to these district. Can you have more application sites? Because this form is even more complicated than the CCF form, and I have to spend 2 hours filling out one. So you should give more resources to the NGOs to help.
Ms. Yu. For student subsidy and leaver, they are very similar. Can student assistance be linked to LEFA? Under LEFA, well, my husband gets a few $1,000s of bonus every year, but if they are counted together, I might not be able to get a full payment or full allowance. I have to pay for the kindergarten fees of my kid, and the size of the household would make a difference. If we link the both of them together, it would be fairer, or else I cannot get the full allowance for LEFA. So if the allowance is or the bonus is counted, I cannot receive the other allowance. Can you offer 3/4 payment or allowance? For the half allowance, I don't know what the threshold is, but for the lower payment, the threshold is very high. For my husband, and if he makes more than $90,000, he cannot receive a full allowance, so it makes a big difference. So LEFA and student subsidy should be linked in terms of the application criteria. And I think you should facilitate both the applications for both in one go. Mr. Lam Kwok-hong from the Low Income CSSA Recipients Concerned Group. Please speak into the microphone. What is the best strategy? You should hurt the other team's best player. That's the best strategy. That's what the government is doing. The disqualified legislators made a lot of criticisms of you. Dr. Law, you said, well, your team should not have to apologize because of the wrong estimations. The Transport and Housing Bureau never had to apologize for tens of billions of dollars of budget overruns. Since the day you join the government, you have to follow the rules of the game. For the policy address on the 11th of October, if nothing can be done, what would happen? Or in the policy address, what would happen if nothing is changed? You have to serve the public, and your job is to right the wrongs of your predecessors. If you cannot correct the wrongs, when are you going to step down? I cannot stay because of one mistake or one error I made in the oath. What about you? Since you introduced the block allocations together with Carrie Lam, you have jeopardized the grassroots. You use your IQ to override our EQ. Before I was disqualified, well, I told you to serve the public, so look at your attitude today. The resources are inadequate, and you are not, the money is going down the drains. How can you say that you are not at fault, and you've only joined the government for 15 days? The speaker is not on the microphone. In terms of district support, yes, can you hear me? All right. On the district support, the idea was to work on 6,000 cases across 10 districts, and now we only have 350 districts. Why can't we allow more NGOs to take part? Now you are dividing Hong Kong into 10 districts, and the tendering is based on the lowest bid. The CCF approach is much better, and everyone and all NGOs can take part and become supporting organizations. Why can't you adopt that approach? It's the more supporting organizations we have, the better. If you only divide Hong Kong into 10 districts, then each unit has to serve a very big area, so that's not the best approach. So it's about the method, not the idea. Right now, only authorized NGOs can take part. Why can't we allow community organizations to become supporting organizations? Our idea is just to support citizens and ensure the best use of public money. You only pay on a case-to-case basis, so no public money would go to waste. The Secretary did not give his stance. I think since the government has completed so many studies, there should be a stance. And Dr. Law is an academic, and you are also a member of the Commission on Poverty. Do you have any views towards lowering the working hours threshold? Can you share your views with us? Can you tell us the deficiencies you observed on LIFA? Ms. Choi Sin-man. On the involvement of NGOs in LIFA, we really hope to help needy residents. We invited the government to carry out publicity. We allowed them half an hour to 1 hour to promote LIFA, but the SWD staff left after 5 minutes. They merely said that the scheme is available, and they only left some leaflets here. Apparently the support is not satisfactory, so we have to review whether we can do better. And for carers, I have a follow-up question. There's a working hours threshold for single working parents. A lot of carers have problems going to work as well, especially carers of children with learning difficulties, and their situation is just like single parents. They have to take care of their the older members as well as their children, but their husbands work all the time. They are going to go over the threshold for sure. And the elderly carers have to buy dementia drugs, and 4 tablets cost $1,000, and they have to take 1 tablet per week. So they might not even be able to receive the dementia supplement because of the income limit. Even if the carers are very poor, they have to face a lower child subsidy, so it's unreasonable. They have to take care of children and elderly at the same time, so why is there child allowance being deducted? Finally, Ms. Hong Chen-yi. I want to tell the chairman that for families like us, for the completely paralyzed like myself, we receive $8,000 a month would be very good already. But for the less healthy people, for example, the cleaning ladies, they might earn $4,000 or $5,000 for a subdivided unit of 50 feet. The rent is $2,500 per month, and together with living, utilities, and water, etc., we have to pay $3,000. We have to dine outside. We can only have 2 meals per day. If we have 3 meals, we might not be able to pay for transportation because I work in Central. I live in Shui-Shui-Po, so it cost me $700 odd for transportation. Chairman and members, we have to consider the subsidy for single member families or subsidy for individuals. why can't the legislators who have been doing well stay, and the ones who have underperformed can continue? I'm not a legislator, but I read the news, and what was written did not tally with the facts. Thank you very much. Let's deal with the two motions on hand. And Dr. K.K. Kwok, afterwards, I will allow you to speak. Dr. Fernando Chang. Thank you. I have two motions, so I'd like to read them out. The first, the low-income family assistance scheme has been implemented for more than a year. The government expected 200,000 households to benefit, but now only 50,000 have benefited. And the main reason is that the application procedures are complicated and the threshold is too high. We urge the government to make the following improvements. First of all, relaxing the MMDHI requirement from 60% to 75% so that more families with working poor can benefit. And you should lower the working hours threshold and increase an extra threshold of 72 hours. And you should lower the threshold of 192 hours to 144 and allow joint assessment of two family members. And you should allow single-person families to apply. And you should streamline the application procedures and allow applicants to declare their working hours. Those in favor, please raise your hands. So it's unanimous. The motion is passed. Second, again, Dr. Fernando Chang. The low-income working family assistance scheme has been implemented for more than a year. The number of beneficiaries has been lower than expected, and the scheme is full of deficiencies and injustice. We urge the government to make the following improvements. First, raising the living subsidy for those living in private lease units, and two, relaxing the income limits of those living in private units, and three, relaxing the working requirements for those who have to take care of disabled persons, elderly, and the chronically ill, and exempting the assets of family members aged 65 or above. And you should stop linking the child allowance with working hours, and subsidies should be given as long as the income requirements are met, and a special subsidy should be given for children with special needs. Only members are allowed to vote. Those in favor, please raise your hands. So the decision is unanimous. The motion is carried. Finally, Dr. K.K. Kwok, you have 4 minutes. Thank you. I'd like to thank the deputations. I think I don't see why the Secretary has to be here, because he refused to provide any response on the deficiencies of LIFA, including the administrative costs, and it's disproportionate to what the beneficiaries are getting. I think he has very thick skin and he has to be held accountable, as Mr. Leung Hong said. I think it's a waste of time to put more questions to him. I want to give my time to Mr. Leung Hong, the former legislator, on what he thinks. And do you have anything to say to the Secretary? Is the microphone on? The microphone's not on. Can you switch on the microphone for him, please? Dr. Law used to belong to the Democratic Party. He is an academic. He took part in the policy making of the government, including the objectives of the policies as well as implementation. He was fully involved. He was involved in poverty alleviation measures for the annual persons, and now he's secretary, so he's able to implement all these, and I'm extremely disappointed. The former officers were not held accountable, and Dr. Fernando Chang's motions are carried. Are you going to take them on board? Yes or no? Now you have the responsibility. You did not have the power, so can you answer that? You said the people before were not at fault. That's, in other words, you will not improve, and vice versa. I was disqualified, but my teammates are still here. You should not follow what your boss is saying. In that we have no, at this point, we have no plans to disqualify more members. What do you think about Dr. Fernando Chang's motions? Are you going to do something? If not, what's the reason? Single-person families should be able to apply, and there should be joint assessment of working hours. Can you allow more NGOs to take part? Can you allow district councillors to help? Say something, genius. I thought you were great at the details. You said implementation is important, but when we talk about details, you have nothing to say. Dr. Kwok, Dr. Law, please address his question. The motions have been carried, so what's your response? I will allow him to speak, and he's staying silent. Would you respond, Secretary? Chairman, I have two new points to make. Some deputations asked about how we can help the district organizations. I would look at what we did in the past and see whether there are more things we can do. Another deputation asked about our views at the review. We are still waiting for some information, including data from the CNST, the CST. So before internal discussion at the government, as someone representing the government, I cannot offer my views. I'm not asking for your personal views. The motions are carried. So is there any respect towards Electrical? We said very clearly in our motions, your time's up. Mr. Leung Yiu-chung, you have 4 minutes. I will not talk about the details of the recommendations because everything is there in Dr. Fernando Chang's motions. But I do not agree with Dr. Law. You said you have to wait till the government receives more data before assessing the situation. This might be your practice. When you look at Dr. Chang's motions, they are not about data, they are about principles. You should think about the intention of LIFA. It's not about the household size. It's not like that at all. You said you would carry out studies. I'm fine with that. But when you said you're waiting for data, I really wonder why that's the case. So does it mean that for bigger households you will give more and for small households less? But today we are talking about principles. You did not allow single-person households to make applications, so that was your principle. So why can't we have single-person families? they can have their families and their lives.
That is a principle. What data will you need to look at? Are you going to do you need to look at the number of singletons who would apply? If there are few singletons applying, you would allow that, otherwise you will not. So you're just making excuses. Could you respond to these questions pertaining to principles? For example, for singleton household, what data do you need to look at? How can you help? How can such data help you make your decision? Well, that is the most important. Just on this particular issue, this is a matter of principle. Could the Secretary respond? Secretary, could you respond to Mr. Leung's question? There are some questions which we may not need any data to help you make a decision, but you may say that you would need time to think about it. I thank you, Chairman. You really answered the question for me. During the last session and this session, the deputations have made different suggestions as to how we can improve on the leaver scheme. We'll certainly go back and think about them and see how we can, come up with some solutions. When I answer an earlier question as to whether or not we already have some, views, I said that we don't even have some of the data we need, including the surveys we've conducted to find out why some people did not apply for leaver. I don't think you should be so evasive. Just answer my simple, straightforward question. How would you respond to the question about singleton households? In the past, the former secretary said that a singleton is not a household, therefore you don't allow them to apply. A household should comprise at least 2 persons. That is a matter of principle. As a matter of principle, would you consider accepting application for singleton households? Can you allow singleton households to apply? It's all right if we need to look at the data, but can you answer the question? Would you consider application for a singleton household? We'll certainly study the suggestion. What would you need to study? Don't just say that you will look into that. That's too vague. What do you need to look at? We can give you the information if you told us, what you need. What do you need to look at in considering whether you allow singleton households to apply? Mr. Leung Yiu Chung referred to some data which I don't have possession of. For example, the comments made by officials previously regarding singleton applications, I don't know. But my understanding is that in my different capacities, for one singleton households not being eligible to apply for leaver, my personal view then was that if a singleton cannot make ends meet as an individual, this may have to do with other policies like minimum wage. If we need to review the policy whether we should allow singleton households to apply for leaver, we will also need to consider the other policies and whether they can provide sufficient support for singleton applicants. So we need to look at all kinds of data together. Finally, I also have one question and concern. Ms. Ng said that the administrative costs for implementing the scheme is very expensive. The ratio worked out to be very high for the administrative cost, so there's a question of cost value for money. Would you like to respond to that? First of all, is the numbers accurate? I don't have the figures offhand, but what I like to say is that when we set up this department, it was based on our estimates when we set up this division or department. And from November 2015, we carried out a series of promotional activities. Our colleagues had also, worked overtime beyond office hours to go to the different districts to brief the residents about the scheme. If the response to the scheme was not so satisfactory, we've really done a lot of work at the district level to reach out to the potential applicants. Some deputations refer to individual cases, say our colleagues would only go to a district for 15 minutes. If the deputations could give us more information, we would be happy to follow up. Our understanding is that we would first approach the organization and ask them how much time they will allow us. We've actually tried being to a district at 7 or 8 p.m. to help 4 families to fill in the application forms. So we sent our colleagues there, even though there were, not even 10 applicants. So so long as there was a need, we actually, went there to provide the assistance. So if the individual organizations could, well, there could be errors in the communication. I'm also very confused. So the deputation could perhaps give me the information after the meeting so that we can follow up. Fernando Zhao. I won't need 4 minutes. But I think we're scheduled to end at 2:30. I haven't yet asked my question. Regarding Dr. Law's attitude and the way he responded to questions from the deputations and our members, I'd like to, make a comment. The Secretary is new to his post. We expect that accountable officials, in respect of important policy issues, should respond to the community and LegCo members. We understand that for the leaver scheme, the government is conducting a review. It would look at different types of data. And you've also come here to listen to the deputations. That is part of the exercise in data collection. But as a Secretary, we do not expect you to just come here and listen and say that you go back and think about them before you would give us a response. As Ms. Leung Yichung said, or the deputations have also put many questions, and Leung Kwok Hong also said that there are many matters relating to principles, and they want the government to respond to these basic questions regarding leaver. If you still even evade such questions, perhaps you are not doing so deliberately, but you are being very careful and not to state tell us your conclusion before you have arrived at a consensus. Mr. Lord, it's not that we expect you to come here to listen to us and immediately tell us what you will do and say accept singleton application and so on, or align the treatment for the carers and so on. We don't have such expectations that the government will do that. What we expect is simply a response that is, humanistic. When we've heard so many low-income households and advocates, and many members who are so concerned, including Ms. Leung Kwok Hong, who have given you your views over the years. You can make a response. You can't simply say, well, we're here to listen, we'll give you a response later on. That is not what a two-way dialogue should be. So, Mr. Law, I hope you'll go back and think about this. As the Secretary, you are a leader. You are the official leading the government's team to respond to the community's aspirations. You cannot hide behind your team and say, we haven't yet, arrived at any conclusions, so we can't give you a response. I'm not asking you for any definitive answers. I just want you to give us a human or humanistic response. And as an accountable official, you can let the public know what is your view? What are your views, and what is the direction that you think we should take? So I hope you will go back and review about the attitude you when you come here to attend a meeting. So today is a public hearing. We're at the initial stage of the review of the leaver scheme. So as the official representative government, it's not appropriate for me to give you, to express any personal opinions. Having heard the members of the deputations, suggested areas which need to be reviewed, I will certainly go back and consider them. I can only say this to Mr. Zhang. In future, when we have some preliminary reviews, after I've heard the views of my colleagues, I believe there will be an opportunity for me to have, a fuller dialogue with members. So that is the end of our meeting. Do we have any other business? If not, I'd like to thank all the members of the welfare panel for their attendance. I also like to thank the Secretariat for their support, especially Dr. Lau Silai, Nathan Law, and Leung Kwok Hong for their contributions to this panel over the past year. Thank you.